In this episode, I sit down with Scott Forsgren and we talk about how to resolve complex chronic illness. What are the steps? What are the tools and levers to use to get to root cause healing? And what is the first step that we should consider as we start walking down this chronic illness journey? I now eat a lot of meat, and so do they. If you want to thrive, you need to eat meat. Meat is required. Hey guys, my name is Judy Cho and I'm board certified in holistic nutrition, and I have a functional medicine practice where we focus on root cause healing, and that often starts with the Carnivore Cures all meat elimination diet. Today I have the pleasure of sitting down with Scott Forsgren. He is the podcast host of the health podcast, the Better Health Guys podcast. Scott has been in the chronic illness space for over 20 years. Anybody that you have ever met in the chronic illness space that are experts and knowledgeable in their field of science that is helping people to get to root cause healing or healing in the chronic illness space, Scott has probably interviewed them or have had discussions to help him find this overall paradigm for healing. Since Scott has been in the space for over 20 years and has learned about Lyme and mold before a lot of the research has been done, including mast cell activation syndrome, he has laid out a paradigm that if he could rewind time of over 20 years, what are the paths and levers he would use to pull to get him healing and healing more effectively. Scott has laid out the paradigm in this conversation of what step to consider first if you are suffering from mast cells, histamine response, limbic system imbalances, nervous system, mind body, mold, chronic illness, gut issues, and any issue that really is in the chronic illness space. It is undeniable that this podcast has so much information. And so maybe for practitioners, it'll be super helpful. But I know for you, if you are just listening because you are suffering from mold or Lyme or some illness and you are just trying to get better, it can be somewhat overwhelming. But Scott is laying out everything he has learned in 20 years so that it can help you get closer to root cause healing. If you find the right person to work with or the right tools to start, these tools that he is sharing with you, these clinical gems, can and are life changing. It is really about finding the right protocol for your life at the right time that you need it. And so there's always nuance in everything he shares. He's not saying that in that specific step that you need to do all those things. It's more nuanced than that. But he was trying to share all of it at once so that you get all the tools in the toolbox that will help you get to root cause healing. His hope is that we don't have to suffer for so long and spin our wheels when there are more efficacious paths to follow to get to root cause healing so that you can live your life and hike like Scott does today. Okay, guys, let's get right into the interview. Hi, Scott. I'm so glad to have you on my channel. I went to your functional medicine conference and I was learned so much about you. And then I learned that you actually had a whole chronic illness journey. And so I wanted to have you on so that you can share your journey and then what you learned along the way. Obviously, you interview so many brilliant minds. And so I would love for you to introduce yourself to the people that are listening and watching.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I greatly appreciate it. So, as you kind of alluded to, I am a health podcaster, a blogger. I do health coaching as well. I'm a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. I'm also the co-founder of the Forum for Integrative Medicine, which is how we connected, and a board member of the Limelight Foundation, which is a great organization for people that maybe can't access medical care for young people 25 and under to be able to get finances for treatment. And my whole journey in this realm really started back in 1996. It's been a long journey, like it has for many of us. Northern California had a tick bite, but I didn't really get super ill until a few months later. It wasn't a obvious bullseye rash or anything like that. And so the symptoms were pretty intense. Probably the most significant was head to toe neurological burning sensations. It kind of felt like you had been out at the beach for 8 hours and, or a chemical burn, something like that. I had issues with my balance, just getting up and walking across the room. I had to prop up pillows along one side of the bed because I always felt like I was going to fall onto the floor. lots of gut issues, cognitive issues, rapid heart rate, muscle twitching, tremors. I mean, the list of things, it was just crazy because I'd never experienced anything like that. I would say it was like a flu times 100. And so from 1997 to 2005, I went to 45 different doctors, neurologists, infectious disease. Nobody really had any real thoughts other than I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. Now we tend to call it ME/CFS, was also diagnosed with fibromyalgia. Multiple sclerosis was suggested by one practitioner. So we kind of went into that realm, and that really was not something that was ever officially diagnosed. But ultimately, I was referred to an acupuncturist who worked at a outlet mall of all places, and she did something called electrodermal screening or electroacupuncture according to Vol, essentially an energetic testing system. And she was the first one that ever said, you should go get your doctor to test you for Borrelia, for Bartonella, Babesia, Ehrlichia, all of these things that I now understand all too well as Lyme and co-infections. And her testing and recommendations led me then to getting positive confirmation of all of those things with other tests. And so that kind of shifted my entire journey. And then, as we'll talk about, that was 2005 when I finally officially got diagnosed with Lyme. And then it was also the same year that Richie Shoemaker's book, Mold Warriors, came out. So that led me into the whole mold and mycotoxin arena. Eventually had to move and dive deeply into that realm as well. But that's kind of how I got from the beginning of the journey to this conversation today.
So for 6 years, you were not diagnosed with Lyme and the co-infections. Did you find some level of healing during that time? And then how much did healing occur once you
Yeah.
were diagnosed with Lyme? And then because why did you look for mold if Lyme was one of the
Yeah.
answers?
So it was actually about 8 years. So 1997 was when I
Okay.
first got really sick. 2005 was when I got the diagnosis of Lyme. I did work early on with a practitioner who was very well known kind of in the chronic fatigue realm, Dr. Jesse Stoff in Arizona at the time. And we were exploring EBV, we were exploring parasites. We never explored Lyme and co-infections. And so by around 2000, I was feeling pretty good. And I was kind of thinking, well, the symptoms I have left, maybe it was just the residual damage from whatever we had been, attempting to treat. I don't think we really knew at the time what we were treating. And so I had a few years from around 2000 to 2004 that I was functioning pretty well. Did I feel perfect? No, but I really didn't still identify as, oh, I really have this serious illness. I thought it was pretty much in the rearview mirror. And then in 2004, over the course of just a few days, all the symptoms came back again, the burning sensations, the twitching, all of that. So I knew for sure that there was still an issue. Interestingly, that relapse happened after being at someone's barbecue and getting multiple spider bites that ended up one of them swelling up the size of a golf ball on the back of my neck for about a month. So when I figured out the Lyme piece in July of 2005, I think diving into Lyme, I already had an understanding that there were so many different pieces. And I was still, I mean, it really wasn't that far into the Lyme treatment to say whether or not I really needed to keep searching. But I was really kind of that personality type of like, okay, we now know it's Lyme, but what about all the other pieces? And when I stumbled onto Richie Shoemaker's work, that really resonated as well. I honestly think that probably the environmental component was as significant as the Lyme and co-infections. And I think most people that have complex chronic illness with Lyme, usually there is a mold component as well. So that's why I kind of dove into that arena as well, and to try to cover as much ground from a treatment and recovery perspective as possible.
Makes sense. So you've been on this chronic illness journey for 20 years now. Obviously, from all the years of learning, there's so much now that you know. What would you do differently? How would you start if it was
Yeah.
back to 1997?
Yeah, so fortunately, I've been really blessed. I think the universe connected me to some amazing mentors that I've learned from, people like Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, Dr. Neil Nathan. I mean, there's a number of them. And I'm happy to, the things that we talk about, I do have this in a slide format as well that we can make available to your listeners if they want to see more of those details. But I would say if I was starting over again, kind of this framework that we're talking about today would really have helped to accelerate the healing process. I think I and many people, I mean, I'm not saying that this is all my unique thought. Fortunately, I have had many amazing mentors, but I think we understand so much more now. I mean, going back to the beginning, we didn't even know about things like SIBO or SIFO or mast cell activation syndrome or Ehlers-Danlos. I mean, there's so many things we talk about now that we didn't even talk about then. Really, the whole mast cell activation piece didn't really enter the scene until probably around 2016 or so. So I think starting over now with the information that we have, and we're still uncovering more pieces. I mean, you know this as well as anybody, right? There's so many things that we're still learning each day in this whole process. But I think if I was starting over, prioritizing really a focus on more the nervous system, the limbic system, the vagus nerve, as we'll get into and talk about some of these steps. But I think that is really foundational for healing. And I think if I had not been as much of a type A plus personality for many, many, many years and had my own emotional traumas and conflicts and all of these kinds of things, I'm not sure that the illness would have been as significant as it was. And so for me, shifting from a type A plus to a type A minus is a really significant part of being able to then benefit from all the other things that I did throughout the last many years.
Okay, so I want to touch on you have this framework for healing. And I think the first step is this nervous system. I'm
Yeah.
curious, I had a slightly different approach. We went through nutrition, realized that for many people, the elimination diet does a lot, but doesn't fully heal. Then we ran into the environmental piece of mold before we did Lyme. And I think part of it was there's this belief in our carnivore community that if you have chronic Lyme, that if you eat the diet clean enough, it will go away, which in our practice we do not see that. So
I've not seen that either.
okay, so we never so as a practice we never pursued that because we believed the N equals many that said that, and then lo and behold, with the people with mold illness, then we started looking at the Lyme piece and we saw it. And then soon after learning about mold, there was a subset of our community that then gets scared of, oh no, I can't go into any building because now I'm scared of everything, scared of mast cells, scared of mold, scared of everything. And so then we created this nervous system. But we learned is some people are not ready to do the mind body program because maybe they still need to regulate their blood sugar because that's giving them low energy. And so they don't even have the energy to do the practices. I'm curious
Yeah.
why you start with step one. Tell me a little bit about, for anyone that's listening that doesn't even know what do you mean by nervous system,
Yeah.
share the lay of the land and then why you put that first.
So this used to be a little bit later in my process, and it really was through mentoring with Dr. Neil Nathan and also Beth O'Hara, who was a functional naturopath, who was another mentor who sadly passed away a year or so ago. So when we're thinking about the limbic system, the vagus nerve, the autonomic nervous system, we're really thinking about how the body perceives safety in our environment. And more over the years, I think what we see is that people are becoming so sensitive that they aren't even able to take activated charcoal or a tablet of chlorella, that they react to so many things. So, one of the reasons that this is foundational at the beginning, if we can work with the limbic system, the vagus nerve, calming the system down, not only is that a beautiful foundation for healing, but it also often allows people to tolerate other interventions that they're otherwise not able to tolerate. And so when we think about the limbic system, we're thinking about many things that could impair the limbic system. And it's very different from mental, emotional related issues that come later in this conversation. But the limbic system, the amygdala, essentially the fear center, it includes other pieces like the hypothalamus and the hippocampus and things of that nature. But it is kind of this anxiety or safety switch. And it then in turn impacts our immune system and our nervous system and our endocrine system. And just because it impacts the autonomic nervous system, it's impacting things like our blood pressure and our heart rate and breathing and digestion and all of those kinds of things as well. In fact, POTS is very commonly discussed these days, and that is a dysautonomia or nervous system dysregulation. So we're already starting to help the body in many ways by doing work in this realm. The limbic system impairment can be triggered by mold exposure, chemicals, pesticides, different infections. There's so many things that can trigger the limbic system. It can be physical, mental, or emotional trauma, but many times it's not. And sometimes when people early on think, oh, you're telling me it's all in my head and this is not a real condition, then they're a little resistant to work in this realm. And so that's why I'm very careful about separating that you can have truly biologically driven limbic system impairment. And so I often think about this as kind of a tiger, like mold in your house was a tiger, or maybe your Bartonella infection was your tiger. And at some point in this process, you've addressed your home, you've dealt with some of these infections. Maybe now it's more a kitten purring outside the window. But if your limbic system still sees that as a tiger and still has that same cascade of stress hormones, then that's not ideal. We want to really reboot the limbic system so that the perception of threat is more appropriate to the actual threat level, that we're not perceiving a tiger when in fact it's a kitten. And so there are more driver's seat active participations type systems in this realm, like the dynamic neural retraining system from Annie Hopper, the Gupta program from Ashok Gupta, Primal Trust from Kathleen King. I mean, these are amazing systems. And I think for many people, doing something with active participation is really critical. But there are other ways if somebody, to your earlier point, maybe isn't able to or ready to invest in that. There are some passenger seat ways that we can work in this realm with things like frequency specific microcurrent or brain tap or things of that nature. And then the other piece of this that Dr. Nathan also connected was we used to kind of work on the limbic system, and then we'd also talk about the vagus nerve, but they were kind of separate conversations. And so what we now understand is that if we work on the limbic system and the vagus nerve simultaneously, that the end result is significantly better than if we're doing one or the other, doing them at different times. And so the vagus nerve really is more about what I kind of alluded to earlier, and supporting that parasympathetic tone, that kind of rest, digest, detoxify, and heal versus being kind of stuck in a more fight, flight, or freeze mode. And so there's many things we can do in that realm too. There's lots of devices these days. Primal Trust, like I mentioned earlier, that also has a very clear, defined vagal component as well. We can do things like humming, singing, gargling. I don't think that those by themselves are going to be fully adequate to address the vagus nerve, but there's a lot of tools that we have these days. And doing the limbic system work and the vagal work is really helping our perception of our environment and our world, like I said, to be more appropriate to the actual threat. And one of the things that I really like that Dr. Nathan said, we used to say, well, we need to feel safe in our world and safe in our bodies in order to heal. And that sounded to many of us kind of like an impossible goal to feel safe. I mean, this world is crazier than ever, it seems. And so I like what Dr. Nathan says, which is that we just need to feel safer to support the healing process. And so working on the limbic system, working on the vagus nerve, calming the nervous system, that really is the foundation. Now, and we're talking here about complex chronic conditions where people have been struggling for many years. If there's something more acute, then absolutely we may need to focus on that first. The order of these steps is certainly, even though it's a kind of conceptual model to really get people to have conversation with their practitioners, it doesn't mean that it's not going to change based on whatever the drivers of the condition are for an individual person. But I do find that if we can focus on the limbic system, the vagus nerve, and the nervous system as kind of a foundation for healing, that people do much better, but also tolerate many other things that will help to move them further forward.
I love that. And thank you. One thing that Dr. Nathan said in the last conference that I thought was really powerful, which made sense when I never thought of it in that context, was if you think about this whole limbic system, feeling safe and understanding that healing takes time, he said that you have to find practitioners that you connect with. It's not that the secret sauce is that they have the secret sauce for everybody, but there is like a vibration or something that's in the universe where you're like, you just watch a YouTube video and you watch someone speaking and you're like, I get it. I
Yeah,
understand them. I connect to them. And that makes so much sense because as you're trying to go through healing, if you don't trust your doctor, you're already putting yourself in this limbic system space that's not conducive to healing. So I just think that was another tool that I think it made so much sense. It's not always the modalities that people use, but in trusting in the collaboration of your healing process, that's also super important.
totally agree. Yeah, the field of that practitioner often is very significant as well. So absolutely agree with you. And Dr. Nathan definitely is one of those people for me.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. So your second step is related to mast cells, histamines. That is such a common issue in the carnivore space. So maybe people will eat a meat-based diet and say, "Hey, I feel better. I don't have as many histaminic issues." And then they start noticing, "Oh, I can't eat certain meats or I can't eat a dairy or something because now I'm having a histaminic response." Can you talk about how it's really just the umbrella of mast cells, what it does, and then why this is the sort of the next step of healing and maybe some levers or tools that you found that can really help this because this is one of the
Yeah.
hardest areas for the carnivore community to heal from. Hey guys, just a really quick break. Nutrition with Judy's private practice is now called Empower Functional Health. I started as a nutritional therapist, but we have become much more all encompassing. At Empower Functional Health, we do functional medicine, chronic illness, autoimmune, gut health, environmental illness such as SIRS, mold illness, Lyme. Regardless of all these names, the goal for us is always to get you root cause healing answers. And of course, carnivore, the all meat elimination diet is always on the table. Food, the right food, is always medicine. We offer functional tests, prescription meds, and really everything to get you closer to root cause, where you can just eat the meats you enjoy and live the life that you are meant to symptom-free. The goal is to get off meds, supplements, and everything else that your body no longer needs support in. Our practice, whether it's Nutrition with Judy, sharing podcasts and free content, or our private practice, Empower Functional Health, our goal is to support you guys in the barbell theory. We give a lot of free content, our evidence-based research. We don't use Substack. We give all our stuff away for free. We interview with the best and make it super tactical so you have clinical pearls that you can walk away with and try in your own healing journey. And then we work with some people in a smaller subset, one-on-one, to provide that level of personalized care. And as we heal these people that are chronically ill, we find these clinical pearls and golden nuggets that we can share then more publicly so that we can make wellness for all. Hopefully, the content and the guides and the free stuff we give out is enough for you to heal. But if it's not, you can always come and work with us in our private practice so that you can get more personalized care. If you want to learn more, make sure to check out empowerfunctionalhealth.com.
So this was also a step that was a little later in earlier incarnations of my thought process, again, influenced by Dr. Nathan. And so he talks about how the mast cell piece is really the third piece of the trifecta or the triad of limbic, vagal, and mast cell for really supporting the foundation of healing. And so there is this bi-directional communication between the limbic system and the mast cells. If we can calm the limbic system, we will have a positive calming effect on the mast cells. And we also know that there's a high number of mast cells in the limbic system. So if we think about mast cells being part of our immune system and releasing 1,200 or more different mediators, histamine being just one of them, a lot of our systemic inflammation and our symptoms can be driven by mast cell degranulation, by histamine intolerance, by other mediators. it can be triggered by things like mold exposure or parasites or electromagnetic fields in our environment, Lyme, co-infections, other environmental toxicants as well. For many people, as you alluded to, foods, medications, supplements, even temperature changes can affect some people. And mental, emotional, physical stress, again, can also trigger mast cells. I was really taken about 10 years ago, I think, at a conference listening to Dr. Theo Theoharidis, who's very well known in this realm. I think he's called the mast cell master, if I remember correctly. And he had said that mast cells are 10 times more activated in the presence of a cell phone. And so I do think that the EMF component of our environment and the exponential increase in this frequency soup that we're all in plays a role in this whole mast cell conversation as well. I agree with you that oftentimes the best first step in this realm is a low histamine diet, or at least a trial of a low histamine diet. Does it work for everyone? No. But for those people that it does, many of their symptoms will go away, and those that remain are often much less significant. So they do see progress. The other piece is to understand, what are we doing that maybe isn't ideal from a mast cell perspective? So are we drinking kombucha every day? Are we having bone broth? Are we eating avocados? Are we taking, capsules and capsules of probiotics that are histamine liberators or affecting the mast cells in a negative way? Fermented foods. I mean, a lot of this timing is everything, and some of these things are not going to be ideal early in the process for someone dealing with mast cell activation. So I think first we want to try and remove as much of that incoming trigger for the mast cell issue. So diet, we'll talk about some of the other things like EMFs and so on. And then thinking about what are some nutraceutical potentially interventions that we can use to stabilize the mast cells, to reduce histamine. There's a number of great companies that have come out now with kind of combination products, HistaQuell from Research Nutritionals, HistaAid from Quicksilver. I mean, there's a lot of tools. Dr. Theo, he's created NeuroProtect and Pure Loot from Algonaut. Those are also great. So, I mean, there's really an abundance of tools. I think many years ago, the challenge was, how do I find tools? Now the challenge is, there's so many tools. How do I find the right tools? And there are also some probiotic products that have been more specifically designed for people dealing with histamine issues. So I like Dr. Ben Lynch, and his probiotic Histamine X is a great one. There's things like quercetin or holy basil or luteolin that can be great for supporting this arena. And then a lot of the H1 and H2 blockers as well, if we're thinking about more traditional antihistamines, can be helpful, as well as things like ketotifen, which is a compounded prescription but can be great, or chromalin. So a lot of things in this realm, but I do think that, to your point, when people start working on calming the mast cells and dealing with some of the things that are triggering them, it often really does move them very notably in a forward direction.
Yeah. The trouble that we see sometimes is with some of the most chronically ill, and maybe it's because they should be working on the limbic system and the vagal tone first, but they will do everything you brought up. So they'll go super strict, non-aged, freeze dried meats. Then they'll try all of the supplements, and maybe they're intolerant of that. So then they move towards the ketotifen, the LDN, the chromalin, and even with that, it's still not enough. And then it's like, well, now we sort of used all the tools in the toolbox, and maybe it's that they have to use another part of your paradigm, and maybe that's really the answer. But
Yep.
we still see some of these sensitivities. And I love that you explained the mast cell, because everyone thinks it's histamines, but in reality, there are so many other chemical mediators beyond histamines.
Yeah, and I do think the limbic system and vagal piece is important, but I also think that many times when we're talking about mast cells, we're missing the external environmental influences. We're still living in mold. Maybe we have exposure to actinobacteria and endotoxins and high levels of EMFs, and we have a router right over our head, and we're sleeping with Wi-Fi turned on, and all of these things. So I think a lot of times, and that's what we're going to talk about very soon, but we can't internally be healthier than the environment that we've created around us. And so I would say that's very commonly one of the pieces in dealing with mast cells that I feel like we can easily miss, or because it seems so overwhelming to think about fixing your house or remediating or moving or whatever, people will tend to come up with reasons to shift their attention somewhere else. And I think that is a very common, significant trigger for the whole mast cell conversation.
Okay, makes sense. Part three is detox and drainage. Do you want to talk about that as
Yeah. And I'll be a little brief. And again, people can certainly access the longer form version of these slides if they like. But I do think that detox and drainage is an absolute top focus of healing, and improving our internal terrain is really the road back. So even if we think about having things like candida or candida overgrowth or parasites, they may actually be in the body because they're doing us a favor in concentrating heavy metals. And so detoxifying, improving the terrain ultimately makes it less necessary for us to be a host to some of these organisms. So first thinking about, what are we putting on our skin? What are our personal care products? What kinds of, people having Glade plugins, or, sadly these days you get in an Uber and there's all kinds of fragrances and things of that nature. And so what can we do first to minimize the incoming pure air, pure food, pure water? That's important. Thinking about other sources internally of toxicity, like maybe dental implants, medical orthopedic implants, breast implants in some scenarios. And so when we talk about detoxification, we're primarily thinking about moving toxins from the liver into the bile, into the gallbladder, into the small intestine, and hopefully out. But much of that bile gets recirculated with enterohepatic recirculation. And so we oftentimes need binders to bind on to those toxins in the bile so that they're not recycled at the same rate that they otherwise would be. So here we can think about activated charcoal or bentonite, or some people like zeolite or chlorella. And again, there's so many companies now that have amazing binders that I won't get into all of those unless you have specific questions about them. But the detoxification piece is really about minimizing what's coming into our overflowing bucket and then using binders to help maximize the excretion or the pathways of elimination, while at the same time thinking about how do we optimize drainage. And so the difference with drainage is the body's innate, inherent ability to remove things from our system. So we're thinking about the liver, the kidneys, the lymphatics, the extracellular matrix, the skin, the gut, the lungs, all of these ways that we have to inherently get rid of toxins from our system. And also, of course, making sure that we're not constipated. If someone's constipated, that's a very early thing we need to address in this whole process. Potentially optimizing the flow of bile and the gallbladder with things like bitters or phosphatidylcholine. That actually maximizes the efficacy of the binders. If we don't have any of these things in the digestive tract to bind to, for the most part, the binders are not going to have a significant benefit. We want to, as part of detoxification and drainage, also think about how do we calm the nervous system? How do we minimize EMFs? If we're in a sympathetic dominant state, detoxification and drainage are not going to be optimal. And then for the most part, I tend to really like for drainage more of the complex homeopathic products that are based on more German homotoxicology. And so we're thinking about things like Pekana remedies or energetics or Des Bio. They all have some beautiful remedies. We can use herbs, so milk thistle, dandelion, solidago, red root, cleavers. There's a lot of things we can use. There's many combination products as well for supporting liver, kidney, and lymphatic. Again, I really like homeopathy in this particular realm. And then certainly combining herbs can be very nice, but I don't tend to rely on herbs alone, generally speaking, because I've seen such good things coming from some of those homeopathic drainage products. And then there's a lot of other tools that are more adjunct that we can think about in helping to unburden the body. So glutathione, if people tolerate it, not everybody does. I'm very much a believer that if something isn't feeling right or we're feeling worse, that we shouldn't push through. That's that type A plus mentality. I think sometimes the body's saying, hey, this isn't the right thing at the right time for me. Epsom salt baths can be great for supporting sulfation. There's certainly in this realm, when we talk about mycotoxins, supporting glucuronidation, which is another phase 2 pathway, can be incredibly helpful. Trace minerals, a lot of our accumulation of heavy metals is probably due to the fact that we're trace mineral deficient. So that can also help support the body in having some of these trace minerals. And generally speaking, I think having a broad detoxification and drainage strategy is the way to go. And then later, if you still need to be more targeted around heavy metals or pesticides or chemicals or microplastics or whatever the latest PFAS, all of these things that we're still learning about, some of the best tools for addressing them, then we can kind of come back and get more targeted or more specific. But I think a broad brush early on can really address a lot of these things. If we're too aggressive with the detoxification process, I'm thinking of someone who's doing something like sauna, and they're not going slow and low, and they're saying, I go into the sauna for 2 hours a day and I feel miserable, but I know it's the right thing. Really being aggressive with detoxification can also further trigger mast cells. If we're super aggressively pulling heavy metals out of the body, other metals from other tissues are going to be liberated, and then we can trigger some of the mast cell issues that maybe we were already dealing with. Then we could talk about, endotoxins is another toxin that we potentially need to think about. We could talk about spike proteins as maybe one of the most significant toxins that people are dealing with since the start of the pandemic. I do really like things like coffee enemas. Some people do well with colon hydrotherapy. I use ionic foot baths and have for many years. Dr. Klinghart's really gone deep into that realm and feels like they're very helpful. Dry brushing, castor oil packs. I mean, there's just really a plethora of tools that we can do here. One of the newer ones that I like a lot is called the Perrin technique, which is a physical body work system to really help with the lymphatics and support the whole drainage process. And then I think we're all learning about newer tools, which I do think are more aggressive. I would not do them early in someone with a complex chronic illness. But when we're talking about detoxification, we're now seeing things like EBOO, like therapeutic plasma exchange. So I think fortunately there are newer tools that are very, very powerful and have a lot of potential. But I would do quite a bit of work before I would think about those, because those in and of themselves can be somewhat aggressive. So that's really my kind of focus on detox and drainage. I think that for most of us, if we didn't have a significant burden of environmental exposures in this world that we live in, we probably wouldn't develop the same degree of chronic complex illness that many of us have.
Right. And I totally am on the same page. I think that there's, in the wellness space, especially in the dietary space, there's this belief of why do you need support in drainage or detox? You have detox organs and those should do the job. So all of this detox stuff is a bunch of, snake oil sales stuff, but it
Yeah.
isn't. And it's because if we can get fatty liver, right, just from the foods we eat or the alcohol we drink, then if you think about that, if that is one of our detox tools or organs and it's not working as well, how are you going to remove it? And just like you said, when if we have too many mycotoxins or Lyme or spirochetes in our system, our body is doing the best it can with what it has. So if you are inundated with heavy metals, yeah, they might create a biofilm around it and then start staying in your system longer to protect you or fill it in your fat. And maybe that's why you're not losing weight no matter what diet you do, because your body is trying to do the best it can. I just had Dr. Karlfeld on my channel and he brought up how cancer is going to create this tumor so that maybe it's protecting you from the parasites or the cancer or the Lyme or the mold, and it's again doing the best. And so when we just try to eradicate the tumor, what is it doing now that it's everywhere in your system? And so I think the drainage and detox, we have seen it in our practice, it matters a lot. And then with the whole constipation aspect, it is so important to have bowel movements because that is where you are detoxing. And like you said, if you are not, the constipation and all that bile that has the toxins will recirculate into your system, go back to your liver, and then it'll just recirculate all the toxicity that you are trying to get rid of. So for those reasons alone, and all the things you shared, I think detox, drainage, making sure that you can eliminate is so, so critical. So thank you for sharing that. What is the next step?
So the next step is that external environment that we talked about. If our external environment is our kryptonite, I think nothing else that we do will ever return us to our superhero status. So we need to create an environment around us that's lifting us up and supporting the healing process, and not yet another thing that's holding us back from regaining our health. I would say that the vast majority of people with chronic Lyme also do have a mold component. And when we say mold, we say that somewhat loosely, in that, as you well know, Dr. Shoemaker talks about this entire soup of things, which could be mold or mycotoxins or actinobacteria or endotoxins or VOCs. I mean, there really are a lot of things, but we need to think about our home, our workplace, our school, and even places where people go, maybe not as frequently or as long in duration, but the gym, the church, the library, and sadly, sometimes the place that keeps people triggered is their practitioner's office that has a mold issue as well, right? So thinking about what can we do first to explore mold? I am very much of the opinion that if someone has the resources and can get a professional, indoor environmental professional that is affiliated with a group like ICI, ISEAI.org, where we know that that inspector is working almost exclusively with medically hypersensitive people, I think that's the best direction that we can go. Finding somebody online that comes in and does some air sample testing, that's not generally going to lead us in the direction of improving our environment. There are some ways that we can self-test as a starting point to try to get a sense for, do I dive deeper here? I do like the Envirobiomics ERMI, or Mycometrics is another company. So that environmental relative moldiness index, you can also then kind of derive a Hertz Me 2 score. The scores with these, the Hertz Me 2 score, I feel like is actually generally somewhat helpful. The ERMI score, not so much, but if you can see specifically, is there Stachybotrys, is there Cotomium, those types of things. Dr. Nathan is a big fan of the mold plates from Immunolytics. I do think they're a nice adjunct where you can see, like, what is all this stuff that's growing from my bedroom? I think they can be helpful. They miss some important things like Stachybotrys and Cotomium generally, but it's a nice adjunct. And then now we're also getting into, depending on how much the practitioner works with, things like testing for actinos and endotoxins and so on. For the most part, it seems to me that people that have an issue with those also have an issue with mold. And if we can kind of address the bigger picture, that those can also shift in a positive direction. There certainly are some people where maybe they have actinobacteria on their skin, and that's a bigger issue. Or maybe they have a sewage backup in their home or endotoxin, and maybe that's an issue. But I do think that for the most part, when we see those, that there is a mold and mycotoxin component as well. Sometimes mold dogs can be helpful. They can also be misleading, but in some cases, I have seen people be able to kind of localize where the issue was. Again, coming back to a good indoor environmental professional. And then what are we going to do if we find an issue? Well, we could remediate. Remediation means removing the source material and then doing a small particulate cleaning. Remediation does not mean fogging. It does not mean ozonating. It doesn't mean anything that's kind of a band-aid. It means find and remove the tumor, essentially. The other option would be to move. And I have seen a lot of people that kind of go from the frying pan into the fire. And so making sure that we do some testing and make sure that that environment, as much as we can, is going to be better than our current situation. Interestingly, Dr. Jill Krista actually has a free meditation to help people kind of break their resonance or frequency with mold. And those people that kind of every place they go, eventually there's a mold issue. And so that's kind of a nice little tool that she's put together. The other would be avoidance. So you hear about people that are living in a tent or a trailer or something like that. I mean, I think it can certainly move the needle. Is it practical? Does it work for most people that have kids and a job and kids in school and all of that? Not so much. I don't generally see people doing that extreme level of mold avoidance. But there's no question, the better the environment is, the more we're supporting our ability to heal. Air filters can be helpful. I think we should, and I do have many air filters, but at the same time, if you haven't removed the tumor, then even though they can be helpful, it's still not going to solve the full issue. If there's a hole in the bottom of the boat and the boat is sinking, we need to kind of plug the hole rather than bail the water out with a paper towel. So would I suggest that people consider good air filters? Absolutely, but not it's not something that's going to move you beyond having to more deeply explore the environment. Then when we think about mold in the internal environment or the body, it is debated. I am a fan of urine mycotoxin testing. Sorry.
Okay.
So real-time labs, Vibrant, I think those are great options. Does it give the full picture? No. Should we be peeing out mycotoxins? Yes. Is that healthy? Yes. But if we have a lot of mycotoxins coming out of the system, where are they coming from? Like,
Right.
is it from the environment? Is it from colonization, where we maybe need to do something with antifungals? Again, also very much debated in the different kind of uh, schools of thought or camps within the mold illness community. So not everybody believes in the idea of colonization, and some people even caution against that. I have seen many times people need to do something to support the sinuses, support the gut, that maybe their environment is now pristine, but maybe they have become the moldy building. Maybe they're now the production factory for the mycotoxins. So there's also kind of more indirect things we can do. My mycolab is one option. So antibody testing for mycotoxins. So indirect because we're looking at the immune system response and then inferring something, versus urine mycotoxin testing, which is looking for the actual antigen, the mycotoxin. Cyrex and Allotest, they have some other tests that we can do to look at some of these indirect approaches. I would say they're oftentimes, if I'm thinking about Allotest, I tend to think of it as a more of a mold allergy test, which is really different from mold biotoxin illness or SIRS, but they often overlap. So sometimes it can give us a clue of like, wow, that's interesting. They had a lot of responses on even a more traditional lab core immunoglobulin test for many different types of molds. Well, does that mean they have an exposure? Organic acids testing in some cases can give us some clues, like might the person be colonized? There is no perfect test for colonization yet, and I don't think they are. They're certainly far from perfect, but there are other clues. We then have the more traditional shoemaker biotoxin markers like TGF beta 1, C4A, visual contrast sensitivity, and then more recently, his gene testing or genomic expression inflammation explained, which is looking at what's the actual genetic expression at that time, not just the potential for a problem when we're thinking about something like SNP testing. And then once we know that, yep, the body is part of this whole equation as well, then we're coming back to what we talked about in step 3. We're coming back to detoxification. We're coming back to maybe some other tools that companies have put together that are a little more specific for supporting mycotoxin related issues or endotoxin related issues. Again, there's a lot of single ingredient tools as well as combination tools. We can use different fibers here as well. So that's Dr. Krista is a big fan of a lot of these bio-binding insoluble fibers. So things like psyllium. There's soluble fibers as well, propylman and glucoman and those kinds of things. More recently, after I had a good conversation with Dr. Robin Rose, where we were talking about chronic kidney disease, Acacia senegal is another fiber that can also be helpful. She mentioned that some refer to it as intestinal dialysis. And so that's something now, after learning about about that. And I knew about acacia, but after hearing her passion for it, that I now put in my smoothie in the mornings, again, supporting glucuronidation can be really helpful in this mycotoxin realm. And if we need to, then later in this process, when we talk about antimicrobials, we might think about, do we need to do something from more of an antifungal perspective? The last part of this step is the EMF piece. So doing some testing, we can do, testing ourselves with like a Coronet or a safe and sound meter from Safe Living Technologies, those kinds of things. But this is also fairly complex. And I thought I was reasonably good, and I did find and mitigate a number of issues, but then I had a professional building biologist come in and they found some things that I had missed. So, in a perfect world, if we have resources to be able to explore all of these things, getting somebody from a building biology institute to come in, Shielded Healing is another company that does great work. Safe Living Technologies has a number of resources for people as well. But we really want to reduce the exposure. So we need to mitigate the exposure with turning things off, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, being hardwired, keeping our cell phone away from our body. There are Wi-Fi routers that are more appropriate for people that are more EMF sensitive, that don't have the same high levels of EMF that they're putting out. So and we could even use, in some cases, protective clothing or protective paint, those kinds of things. Then we get into the whole conversation around harmonization, which is wearing something, putting something on your cell phone. That to me is icing on the cake. It's not the cake. You have to reduce and mitigate the cumulative effect of all of these fields that we encounter every day. And then if there's something that is harmonizing your body's response to them, do I use those things? Yes. Would I ever tell somebody, just ignore all of the exposures, keep your Wi-Fi turned on, and just wear this thing or put this thing on your phone? No, I don't think that's a reasonable approach. And then there are supplements that can help. Rosemary, propolis, Bodyguard Supreme from Supreme Nutrition is another one. There's some homeopathics like EMF Protect and Balance from Desbio. Even magnesium or melatonin can be great. And then remembering that EMFs, if we're more heavy metal toxic, we then are more of an antenna for these things. Also, why we want to be working on detox and drainage. And they can also have a component that is limbic. So the EMF piece, we're also thinking about some of those limbic system tools that we talked about earlier as well. So primarily looking at mold, that soup of toxins that we think about in the SIRS realm, and the EMF piece. And if we can really reduce those, that will also really support the healing process for most people.
So if I were to summarize this section, which you did a great job, it's making sure in the environment that the environment is safe, and then considering your environment, so your internal body, and seeing if there is colonization. I will tell you that as much as I trained under Dr. Shoemaker, I respect his work, we have people in our practice that have been colonized, whether it was in the nose, the fungus, I mean the gut, so SIFO, but there's also people with lungs, with mold balls growing, the aspergillus
Yeah,
balls. So
yeah.
there is a place, and I think for me it's always, and I will always stand by what works and what are the tools available to the person. So for example, we have so many people that listen to us internationally, they cannot get those labs, no matter which
Mm,
way we go. So
yeah,
then the next best bet is to do a urinary mycotoxin test. You can manipulate the results where, for example, you don't eat a ton of moldy foods before you take the test,
right.
and you make sure, and so limit the grains, limit any foods that have a propensity to have mycotoxins. You then, you provoke with NaC or gluten, or whichever one that you can tolerate, and then you try to see, is there a certain strain of the mycotoxins that actually come out high. And so at least for people that are not even in the US, they have tools. So I think early on I was like, urinary mycotoxins are not ideal at all, and there is some blend, but there's also arguments for the labs, right? The labs, your TGF beta can go up for other reasons other than,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think what really matters is, with the person in front of you, how can you best help them? in figuring out, is it a colonization? Is it just actinos? Is it, the whatever the soup is? And then is it just internal or is it external? And then also being mindful of the EMFs as much as possible. Teslas are so popular. And it's just, do you realize you're enclosed? And I had a friend that said, every time I go in my Tesla, I have a headache afterwards. And I do not think if you're, especially if you're immunosensitive, that you should be buying yeah. So,
I totally agree. Yeah, and I think some people find it stressful, and I understand that, Dr. Shoemaker doesn't necessarily agree with some other leader in this realm, or they don't agree with him. And it is difficult when there's really not consensus around some of these things. But at the same time, I value Dr. Shoemaker's work. It
right.
certainly influenced my life in a very positive way. At the same time, I also value people who have a different or broader toolbox. And until we have a solution that works for everyone, we need some disagreement to foster progress. If they all
Agreed.
agreed, then we wouldn't still be out there really working to find new solutions. So I just appreciate and am grateful for what each of them brings to the table, even though, to your point, they may not all agree on everything.
I love that. I love that stance of with disagreement, then you won't have just groupthink, right? And then there's no progress. So I love that. I love that actually, that thinking. What is the next step?
Pretty basic. The next step, which is step 5, is optimizing sleep. So EMF exposure in the sleep location is going to be one of the most significant issues related to insomnia that I learned from Dr. Klinghardt many years ago. Light hygiene. So thinking about blue light exposure, things that are going to kind of removing the things that are going to keep us from sleeping, having a dark room, having a cold room. Um, there's lots of supplements. I mean, melatonin is my drug of choice and has been for many years, but what if the issue with sleep is more that our blood sugar is dipping in the middle of the night, thus creating more cortisol to raise blood sugar, and then cortisol not keeping us sleeping? What if it's more of an oxygen saturation issue from obstructive airway issues, sleep apnea? I personally really like mouth taping and even using nasal dilators to support kind of the airflow while you're sleeping. There are other tools like peptides and things that have emerged in this realm. There's a lot of devices now like the Apollo Neuro that Dr. Nathan likes for even other reasons beyond sleep. And I do some of those things as well and kind of use technology to kind of calm my system to prepare for sleep. But if we're not sleeping well, then again, all of the other things we're doing are probably not going to work as well as they could. And anything we can do to support sleep is going to exponentially increase the progress that we make. I should
Uh,
also say that histamine, since we talked about that earlier, if we haven't addressed the mast cell piece, histamine is another big driver of why people don't sleep well. So sometimes we start introducing some of those tools for mast cell and histamine issues, and then that can really support sleep. I personally like to use an Aura ring to see what my readiness and sleep score and HRV and all that kind of stuff is. And when you then implement a few changes and observe for a few nights, that really can kind of be a really nice guide.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about the Aura Ring. In one aspect, I think that is very helpful while you're trying to fine tune and figure out what, just like a CGM is beneficial. So if your blood sugar is dipping, you could figure out, oh, maybe I'm having a cortisol response in the middle of the night and that's why I'm waking up. The Aura Ring, I feel that if we think about the limbic system and right, what we perceive is what make a reality. If you get a score of like, take it easy this day because your readiness score is low, then you are already saying, okay, well, today is a lost day. So that's the only reason I think long
Fair.
term we should be a little bit mindful. But
Absolutely. Yep.
what's your next step?
So the next step is movement. And here we're not talking about bowel movements, we're talking about moving the body. So we really want to avoid fluid stagnation. We want to keep the lymphatics moving. We want to keep our digestive system moving. All of this to also support detoxification. But it's critical that we're not pushing beyond our limit. So if we have post-exertional malaise after exercise, then it's too much. We need to find what we can do comfortably and then do slightly less than what we're tolerating. I think walking is highly, highly, highly underrated. I try to walk 4 miles a day in addition to other things that I do as well. So park a little further away from the front of the store, get a treadmill, swimming can be great. If we're thinking about aggressive aerobic or weight training or something like that, I think that can be stressful to the body. So kind of what you were just talking about with the Aura Ring, how do we find things to support movement, exercise that we can tolerate, but not going from that place where it's beneficial or hormetic, meaning stressing the body in a way that we have a positive healing response to it, but going into that more stressful, then we're actually adding more challenge and more stress on the body, and that's not going to be helpful. So if there was one takeaway from step 6, I would say walk to what you can tolerate without feeling worse. And that's going to make a lot of progress in many cases.
We have many type A clients and patients, and they will try to do exercise and go to the gym, and then they'll lift, but then they have exhaustion for the next few days. That's the sign where you have pushed too hard and it is not a benefit to the system. So I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
What is your next step?
So, step 7 is coming back to the mental emotional conversation we were having earlier. I think that trauma or conflict can certainly set the stage for illness. There's a lot of talk about ACEs or adverse childhood experiences. But I also think that many people, the illness itself, being gaslit, the fear of, oh my gosh, my body's not showing up, I can't work, what am I going to do? I think the illness itself can become the trauma that we still then need to address. And if we're thinking about mental, emotional, it doesn't mean that your whole condition is in your head, but we know that mental, emotional triggers do influence physical body responses and can lead to physical illness. So in chronic Lyme, what I've observed is most people are type A, most people are perfectionist overachievers, many don't feel they deserve to be well. So we need to look at these things. What are the internal messages? What are the tapes that we're playing? I think it's important not to become attached to our illness,
Yes.
to be able to focus more on creating a new story than living in the past or current story. I think it's really risky to take on labels like limey or moldy or whatever. Like those are a part of my experience, but they're not who I am, and I don't want to carry that around like a badge of honor. Dr. Klinghardt also has what he calls the Klinghardt axiom, which is essentially 3 different components: mental, emotional, toxicity, and infection, and talks about how we really need to work on all 3 of those simultaneously to keep them in a reduced state. Otherwise, if we focus just on one, they will kind of equilibrate back and come back to that same level of whatever thing we didn't focus on enough. If we think about emotions as well, like I've personally been doing a lot of exploration into kidney health in the last year. And so, well, what emotions are tied to the kidneys? Fear. Well, we could take lots of kidney supplements that may be helpful, but if we're living in a state of fear, maybe addressing that emotion is going to actually help the physical functioning of the kidneys. So this is very powerful work. Dr. Klinghardt talks about his 5 levels of healing, which is physical, energetic, mental, emotional, intuitive, and spirit body. And things that we do at those higher levels, kind of being a pyramid with physical at the bottom, things we do at the higher level, like this realm would be 3rd level work, that has a significant downward impact on the physical body, probably more so than any supplement that I'm going to be able to take. So I like things in this realm like EMDR, applied psychoneurobiology, rapid eye technique, emotion code. And we're not really thinking about talk therapy where we're reliving the trauma and re-traumatizing ourselves kind of at an energetic and cellular level. A lot of these tools, we're working to try to release that imprint, that cellular memory of some trauma, big or small. And one of my favorite tools in this realm is a book called How to Heal Yourself When No One Else Can by Amy Scher, where she really walks people through techniques for how to work to release that kind of energetic imprint of many different emotions on our health. So I think this is also very critical.
I want to add a couple things to this section. So in our Mind Body program, we have a something that's similar to Gupta DNRS, the limbic system retraining, but we have sections on healthy relationships? Like, what does that look like? What is our family role? So, if we were always the sick child or the sick person, or that was our identity, that everyone needed to care for us, well, what if that got removed from us? So, what if that is not the role we're playing anymore? How would that look like? Are we the glue that kept the family together because there was chaos? And so, maybe in your illness or maybe in something that kept the family together. So, now we start challenging what is your role if you were to look at the family as a unit and a dynamic, and what was that role you played? And then were there any core wounds? So growing up, did you lack security? Did you lack feeling safe? And then did you lack a being heard? So were you only loved if you were quiet and you were, in the corner? And so all of these things, then if you could contextualize it to see, is there a way that you're responding to the world, including your illness, that then is impacting your wellness? And so we try to just bring that to the front so that then people can break from these, so that you are not your illness, you are not that. And even if you have been sick for 20 years, what would life look like, right? So visualizations, what would life look like if you were no longer sick? How would you live your life? And these things I think are so imperative. And the big thing is, I think relationships are so, so key. There was that Harvard study that showed that the key to longevity is not the diet you're eating, all the different things that we think about, but it was, did you have somebody that you could call in the middle of the night or just call that can be there for you? And so I
Yeah.
think, we're in a world of loneliness. We do everything virtually. And so I think that if you truly have, it doesn't have to be a significant other, just one other person that you genuinely can connect, be vulnerable with, that will really support healing, because you know that if you weren't in this world anymore, that it would actually matter to somebody. And I think that is so critical.
I agree with everything you just said. And I would say, as much as having supportive relationships, also removing the
Yes.
toxic ones is important for really catapulting the healing process as well.
Totally. I think that is very, very important, actually. So I totally agree with you. What is your next step?
So, step eight, really, this is thinking about things coming into the body. So, hydration, nutrition, the microbiome, micronutrients, as well as the gut. So, if we're thinking about hydration, lots of people in the SIRS realm drink a lot of water. They have low ADH. They're still cellularly dehydrated, peeing everything out. Are we also still bringing toxins or toxicants into the system by the water that we're drinking? So, I tend to like distillation or reverse osmosis. Yes, putting back some minerals and electrolytes and sea salts or cell salts, things like that, structuring the water so it's also potentially better accepted by the cells. When we're thinking about nutrition, removing the triggering foods that are creating inflammation. So I think that gluten is non-negotiable for people that are really struggling with their health. I think that cow dairy for many people should be avoided. If they really have to have it, at least have A2 dairy and maybe sheep or goat as an alternative. Lower sugar, lower histamine, really individualizing the diet to that person, thinking about some of the things that we're eating. If we're doing spinach smoothies every day, are we adding oxalates into our system that are creating other problems? Now, there is the conversation about maybe a significant portion of the oxalate burden is coming from fungal colonization in the body,
Thank you.
but are we also taking in a lot of these things from the outside in our diet that we could reduce? I'm not saying stop, because there is oxalate dumping and people can get worse. Also looking at proteins and fats for the most part more than carbs, unless it's a complex carbohydrate like vegetable, something like that. And then being highly nutrient dense. So I start the day off with a power shake with healthy proteins and fats and lots of fibers, which are also binders for supporting detoxification. I really think when we're thinking about nutrition, we also want to look at micronutrient deficiencies. This is also a newer piece of this thought process, in that I've done a few of these in the last couple years with like Vibrant or Genova or whatever. And it's interesting to see, like, maybe somebody has clear B vitamin deficiencies. Maybe that's going to affect their methylation. Maybe they have vitamin K deficiencies. Maybe they have zinc deficiency, which overlaps into the realm of cryptopyruria or KPU. Maybe their omegas are off. Maybe they need Surprisingly, many times people in this realm need more healthy omega-6 and less omega-3. So lots of things in that kind of micronutrient deficiency realm that I have more recognition for now than I probably did a couple years ago that can be quite helpful in supporting moving people forward. The microbiome, I would say, this is the area that I think of all of them is the most in need of significant advances. I was on early on antibiotics for almost 4 years before we had all of these tools that we're talking about now. It was like you have Lyme disease, like you're really struggling. This is what we're going to do. I still struggle to get my microbiome optimized, and I do the yogurts and the super gut yogurts and take probiotics and all of these things. But optimizing the microbiome, I would love to see some breakthroughs in this realm because I think the tools we have are still not significant needle movers. I rarely find that probiotics are significant needle movers for people. And then just gut health, thinking about intestinal hyperpermeability, thinking about the impact of mycotoxins on the lining of the gut, thinking about the production of endotoxins from a dysbiotic microbiome, maybe incorporating things here like BPC or other tools to kind of support the lining of the gastrointestinal system. But step 8 really is about how do we optimize a lot of those inputs into the system to support the healing process.
Yeah, I totally am on the same page with, I could give you one example with just vitamin B1 or thiamine. It's pretty deficient in most meats. If you were to eat pork, that is probably the most nutrient dense, and that's why I like the rainbow of meats. But vitamin B1 or thiamine helps it has it helps to convert to energy, but it helps the nervous system regulate. So that alone is so powerful. And so that's why I'm right there with you. If you can fuel the body with the proper raw materials, you're giving your immune system, your gut, which has 70 to 80% of your immune system, it gives it the strongest capacity to fight whatever's going on and then do all the other steps that you're mentioning. So I'm right
And
there with
and
you.
B1 is beautiful. It actually hits a lot of the steps that we're
Yeah.
talking
No,
about,
totally,
right? So
totally.
that's in the whole Elliott Overton
Yes.
Chandler Mars realm. And I do take B1 in the form of TTFD
Okay.
every day, and I think people should dive into it. It in some cases is the most significant needle mover for people with SIBO as well.
Okay. Step 9.
So this is energy production. Here we're thinking about the mitochondria. So we need cellular energy to do all of the things that we're talking about, detox and repair. The challenge with mitochondrial support is we still have to think about the cell danger response. And ATP, if we think about extracellular ATP, not only is it energy currency, but it's also a danger signal. So in some cases, we need to not be super aggressive with supporting the mitochondria. We may need to address some of the triggers for the cell danger response before the body's ready to kind of amp up that ATP production, or start slow and low and bring tools in over time. Lots of supplements. In fact, this is one where thiamine can be beautiful, but also things like red light therapy can be great. Frequency specific microcurrent for supporting the mitochondria. We want to also think here if we're thinking about energy production, given that so many people have fatigue and brain fog and all of these, the adrenals, the thyroid, maybe introducing some adaptogens to support our stress hormones and our adrenals while we work through reducing sources of stress. So this step really is about mitochondria, adrenals, thyroid, that whole HPAT axis essentially.
Okay. Yeah, and a lot of the steps, I really like that a elimination diet, especially focused on meat, because it's the most bioavailable nutrients. Even if your gut function, because of mycotoxins, because of Lyme, is getting impacted, every bite you have the best chance of getting the most bioavailable nutrients to support the raw materials, to support mitochondrial function, and then you can always tweak it then when it's not enough. So that's where I love starting with the diet, because
Yeah.
the cleaner the diet, the less insults to the immune system with any processed foods, high sugars. Gluten is a huge one. So anyone that now we see that are very sensitive to gluten, I'm always, my ears perk up with, oh, you probably are suffering from some level of chronic illness that may equate to mold illness, SIRS, Lyme, and et cetera, because they are just unusually sensitive to gluten. So
Yeah.
I'm
I mean, I'm sure I could learn a lot from you. Maybe we'll have more conversation about carnivore. I've certainly had clients who were really struggling with gut that it was very significantly beneficial. My hesitation with it is more long term than short term. And I think about microbiome diversity. And if we're only eating meat for year after year after year, are we going to shift the diversity of the gut because we don't have some of the fibers and prebiotics and other things that are necessary? And from what I understand, and I'm not a deep expert, I know you are, so hopefully I'm not insulting you, but from what I
yeah.
understand, even Paul Saladino over time has broadened what he now kind of considers carnivore and
Sure.
incorporates, fruit and other things as well. But I 100% agree with you, like getting the insults out of the way is so critical.
Yeah, I'd love to share more, but I could give you like a quick 1 minute summary. A couple things. So we run a ton of the stool tests, the PCR stool tests, and obviously they're not perfect. We will see the all the short chain fatty acids for carnivore, so eating only meat, whether it's years or just a couple months, it is all over the map. So the acetate, propionate, butyrate, all over, whether they eat dairy or not, because dairy is the highest bioavailable version of butyrate, which is the same derivative of butyrem, which is from butter, same Latin word. And so I think there is this notion that fiber, which again, it is not even soluble. So I agree that fiber is great as a binder, but why do we need a vegetable or a nutrient that didn't exist maybe even 150 years ago? And so that's the just the common sense logic of we didn't have this rainbow of vegetables. We always had meat. It was always on the table. Maybe we need to eat more of the blood. Maybe we need to eat some more of the organs. I don't think certain organs, but and yes, we need to eat the bone marrow. But if we are in health, why do we need a level of diversity that we think is normal today? And my biggest thought is most people, whether are not on a carnivore diet, we see people go really strict with paleo. So they're eating a lot of meat, they're leaving in the rainbow, and they're removing all the processed foods. But you don't see a lot of them having, I have the best gut health now. Now my diversity is so strong. I've removed all the processed foods, but they still struggle. And so you see probiotics, colostrum, immunoglobulin still being recommended to this group of people. So we already have these groups and camps of people that are doing the diets in the variety of ways, and they're still not healing enough. In the carnivore space, the people that are going super strict, yes, we provide gut support. So we'll recommend hydrochloric acid to increase stomach acid. We'll recommend digestive enzymes to make sure you're breaking down your protein and assimilating it. We'll even get people on immunoglobulins, and that is just the bovines, the blood from the animal, and it helps. I had Dr. Sabine Hazen on, and she talked about how it helps with your whole immune function. And so that is the number one supplement she recommends when looking at the microbiome. You totally have to have her on if you haven't. And so she uses that from an animal. And so she still believes in fiber, but she has seen the microbiome shift with these immunoglobulins that are from the animal.
Plus,
So,
they're great endotoxin binders
yes,
and
yeah,
many other
totally.
binders, right? So in that realm, we think of it a little bit as a binder as well.
Yeah.
This one for sure. I don't want to insult you by
No, no,
pretending
no.
to be an expert on carnivore. I've had some reservations, and at the same time, all of this that I'm talking about today is subject to change. I learned from people like you and many others, and my thought process today is not the same as what it was 6 months ago. So I love hearing again different perspectives.
Yeah, and Scott, I love that you are open. That was one of the reasons I wanted to have you on. It's very obvious that you are just want to learn and then help other people. And so, yeah, I love that you are open because if we are not open, I mean, there are people in the carnivore space that hate that I just won't stick to carnivore, but I know then I have to look at my chronically ill patients and say, I'm sorry, you're not doing the diet well enough. And I cannot with a ethical heart say that. And so that's why I'm like open to tell me what things that you've seen work, and I'm willing to try it in our practice, and then we will just share back what we have seen work and not work. And then the last thing I want to say about Paul Saladino is I think he is suffering from something beyond carnivore. So I will just, if put all this stuff together, I think it's more than diet for him. And I wonder if he falls into the bucket of people we're talking about right now. And so a lot of people end up just chasing the diet, but firsthand that it's not always just the diet. And so if it's not the diet, you're chasing your tail, saying, is it carbs or not, this or that or not? Or what if it's actually the environment and everything else that you're looking at?
And I did, by the way, listen to your interview with Sabine Hazen, so that was
Okay,
nice.
okay. Yeah, you have to have her on if you have not had her on. So she's amazing. So what's your next step?
So step 10 is really about immune modulation and reducing inflammation. I see so many people with Lyme and chronic infections think that kill, kill, kill is the road back. And really, health is not about killing these microbes. It is our response to the microbe that makes the disease. And so many people have, yes, some areas of the immune system may be suppressed or depressed, but many people have these hypervigilant, overreactive autoimmune type responses that creates a lot of inflammation and drives many of our symptoms. So I'm thinking here about things like low dose naltrexone. One of my personal favorites is low dose immunotherapy. So Ty Vincent's work, fantastic personally. One of the things that moved the needle for me the most. Homeopathy or homeopathic nosodes, black seed oil can be amazing. There are a number of other paraprobiotics and things that we can explore. This is also a step where peptides shine the most. So when we're talking about modulating the immune system, some of the thymosin, TA1, TB4, BPC, KPV, those can all be really nice. And really also then thinking about how much is inflammation being driven by oxidative stress, thinking about boosting the immune system for many of us makes things worse. The goal is to modulate, to calm, to create integration with our microbiome, to create more tolerance. So I think before we get into killing something, we want to try to modulate the immune system as much as possible, maybe bringing in some SPMs or pro-resolving mediators. In fact, I know you have one that you talk about and love on your show as well in terms of some of these fatty acids. Some people like fish oil. I have mixed feelings about it. I think low dose fish oil in some cases can be helpful. Proper plant-based oils, obviously not cooked, and all of that can be helpful. And then I really also in this realm like some of the work of Dr. Dan Goodenow with things like prodrome glia, some of the plasmalogen precursors. But we can really shift the symptom picture if we can get the immune system to stop just kind of firing at everything and create more modulation and regulation.
And I think a lot of the steps that you just mentioned too will also support this step. And it makes sense why you're then having it later so that anything that was not picked up, now you can hyper focus on that. So that totally makes sense.
So step 11, then, this is what I think is probably one of the most overlooked issues in complex chronic illness. This is hypercoagulation. This is fibrin accumulation. This was a big issue prior to COVID. I have, and just recently put all these pieces together, but I have a genetic predisposition to hypercoagulated or thick blood or fibrin accumulation. I learned many years ago about this from David Berg, and then Dr. Ann Corson was a big mentor. Now, since she's largely retired, Ruth Chris is a nurse practitioner who's amazing as well. And she created a panel through LabCorp that is beautiful for looking at all of these different clotting factors, essentially. And that might lead you to nattokinase or lumbrokinase or some of those tools. But in some people, the results have been concerning enough that they needed more conventional pharmaceutical interventions like Lovenox and other tools in that realm as well. So the vascular health, the clotting piece, I think it's even more significant now since COVID. I think it's one of the bigger reasons people have so many issues now with long COVID and so on. If we have hypercoagulation, all of these nutrients and herbs and other things that we're taking, oxygen even, are not really getting as deeply into our system, into our tissues. And we also have a less effective waste removal process from the body. So really, this is so critical. I wish everyone with a complex chronic illness in the realm of Lyme and mold and the things that we're talking about would know for sure that they're not dealing with hypercoagulation and fibrin accumulation because it is such a big piece of the picture for many of us.
The concern I have with some of the supplements that you recommended are that if some people are suffering from metabolic syndrome and they're on high blood pressure medications, they shouldn't always just quickly get on these kinases or even some of the omega fatty acids. So, what would be your recommendation? So, it sounds like there's some type of lab core testing or some type of
Yeah.
blood testing.
Yeah, I mean, of course, any of these things I'm talking about, I'm not encouraging people to self-treat. So absolutely, you should be working with your doctor, considering pharmaceuticals and other things. But, I would say there are certainly people on nattokinase and serapeptase and some of these things that maybe are on other pharmaceuticals, but it absolutely should be considered. So I agree with you. I mean, with many of these things, especially when we're talking about clotting, we want to be cautious. But if someone has significantly elevated prothrombin fragments 1 and 2, or many of these there's about 10 things that Ruth Chris looks at in this panel. They definitely are not to be ignored. So if there are some abnormalities, then given the context of what you talked about with being safe and considering combinations and all of that, we still really need to address this. And then also maybe taking it a step further and thinking about endothelial health and glycocalyx and vascular health and nitric oxide. And, there's a lot of tools, the arteriosyls and the pycnogenol base, the vinias, those kinds of things that can be helpful. But I think particularly since the pandemic hit, this whole vascular conversation is really in need of major focus for many people.
I agree. There's a supplement that we generally recommend. It's not, we haven't used it much, but I will put in the notes because I can't remember it. But it's a certain, I think it's a plant derivative that helps reduce any of the vascular inflammation you're feeling. I know it doesn't work for everyone, but I will just at least give an option for people too.
Yeah,
So,
I'd love
but
to hear. I mean, fucoidan is another one that sometimes can be helpful. There are some various seaweed, marine type products like what you find in Arterosil and others. But yeah, tell me something new, and I would love to explore.
okay. And then the next step.
Step
No,
12. So we're
12,
we're
the
we're getting
microbial.
we're getting close to the end. So reducing microbial overgrowths. I tend to think of this in a particular order. It doesn't mean the order has to be the same. I like to start with viruses and retroviruses because I think many people, particularly now, are dealing with EBV and varicella and some of these viruses that create a lot of their symptoms. I usually find people tend to tolerate those kinds of things better than going after, let's say, Bartonella, for example, then getting into the parasites, then some of the smaller organisms like the bacteria, the GI dysbiosis, the SIBO, then moving into fungus, yeast, mold, SIFO, all of that. And then kind of towards the end, Lyme and co-infections, and maybe then biofilm. I don't know that everybody needs to be super aggressive with biofilms, but certainly it is a component. Many of us do. At the same time, there's healthy biofilms too. So we don't want to be too indiscriminate about just trying to eradicate biofilms. It's that let's kill, kill, kill kind of concept. And that's not really an ideal way to think about it. So I think just for sake of time, I'm not going to go into a lot of the details on tools that we could use for each of them. I'm happy to make these slides available for people. I do think the viral piece is a bigger issue again, since we have dealt with SARS-CoV-2, that many people have reactivations of things like Epstein-Barr virus, even Bartonella or Mycoplasma. So using herbs and homeopathy and other tools in that realm. Parasites, I think this is an area that you explore as well. Just half the battle with parasites is finding a test that can actually identify them, right? Most of the labs that are available are not ideal. I do like Parawellness Research in Colorado with Dr. Raphael D'Angelo, who looks at stool and urine under the microscope and often finds things. Sometimes I think in this realm, we have to kind of get into more of the energetic testing space with tools like ART from Dr. Klinghardt or various devices. There's really two schools of thought in the parasite realm, some that feel and are very successful using herbs and homeopathy and things of that nature. I also really value Dr. Klinghardt and Dr. Simon Yu that find that they really like to use more of the pharmaceutical interventions as well. Keeping in mind that when we're killing parasites and fungi, that we're probably releasing more metals into the system. So the earlier steps are still in process, right? Just because we're taking some binders and then we moved on to the next step. I mean, we're still doing those kinds of things as we continue on in this process. Then, like I said, looking at the gut, that there's lots of herbal tools that we can use in this realm as well. I think there is a place for some of the yogurts that Dr. William Davis talks about, assuming that it's not triggering someone's histamine related issues as well. And then getting into the fungal mold yeast piece that we talked about. So yes, there could be canned, but it could also be that maybe there's some aspergillus, like you mentioned, and you've seen in your clinic. So that could be using herbs. It could be homeopathy. It could be things like undecilenic acid. But there is a place for practitioners using other tools like itraconazole potentially. And then I would say when we're doing some of this fungal work, we often forget the sinuses. And have learned that earlier this year, doing some work on the sinuses and having a little bit of a reaction I didn't expect and kind of going, oh, wow, the sinuses are a bigger piece of the puzzle that maybe I gave credit to. Lyme and co-infections. So we're thinking here Borrelia, Bartonella, Babesia, lots of companies now that I love that are very helpful in the herbal realm, in the homeopathy realm. Des Bio has some great tools for using homeopathy to support people. There's other kinds of wearable devices that people can use that are using frequencies. There's ozone. There's so many tools that we now have in the Lyme and co-infection arena. I think this area can be a little tricky, particularly Bartonella. That can already trigger OCD, anxiety, rage, those kinds of things. And sometimes when we find the exact right tool, those symptoms can get worse. And it's not necessarily an indication that that tool is not the right tool. But I think we have to be I tend to approach this kind of slow and low and cautiously. At the same time, I know there are, what I did 20 years ago, antibiotics and other more aggressive tools. And I've sometimes seen those work well for people too. So, I'm very open within reason to many tools in the toolbox. And then coming to the biofilm conversation, I tend to think we want to do that later in the process. You already alluded earlier to the fact that heavy metals and other things can participate in these biofilms. And so if we're going to come in aggressively and try to obliterate biofilms, we are essentially opening Pandora's box, and we may be triggering more mast cells, more histamine. We may be releasing then infections and other toxins that we need to also then be addressing. So there's tools. Dr. Klinghardt tends to like Cystis T as more of a selective biofilm kind of breaking tool. There's others that are very potent that I've made mistakes along the way and got too aggressive and, really flared pain and other things. But I think biofilm support for the most part, I think we want to address as much as we can before we then start looking into these biofilms so that we're not triggering more inflammation, more immune dysregulation.
Yeah, and I think that's this conversation or this step specifically goes back to finding the right practitioner to work with that understands your case to figure out because you've brought out so many good tools. And obviously, if you're just trying to do your care on your own, it's so overwhelming. But it's because there are tips and tricks along the way that as practitioners you see that you would then combine and work together and know these nuances. So I think it just goes back to having that connection with your practitioner, find the right person that works for you that you trust, and then going from there because I know it can sound overwhelming, but there is nuance. So, what is your next step?
So, step 13, as we start winding things down, really is the genetic component. I did not have this as part of my model. And here we're thinking more about the SNPs or
Okay.
single nucleotide polymorphisms. What are the patterns of potential inefficiencies that someone might have? Is it sulfation? Is it something else? Is it in some other, let's say BH4 or methylation or some realm where we could then say, okay, maybe some focus here could be helpful. At the same time, I do not think that genetics are where the gold is. I do not think that exploring the genetics is where we're generally going to find the big answers. I put this kind of more towards the end because I think we want to address as many of the epigenetic influencers of gene expression before we start focusing too much on the genetics. The other piece is it can become very complicated if you're working with a practitioner, and there's some good ones. Bob Miller is very good. Many of his practitioners are very good. But if you look at all of these different issues, that you don't really even know if they are issues. They're just potential issues.
Right.
And then you start supplementing for each of them. I find, oh, you can be on like, 12 different products just to address the potential of something that we don't really know how much of a role it's having. So the other caution I have in getting too deeply into this realm, and I see it every day, is people internalizing their brokenness because of their
Yes.
MTHFR or because of their HLA-DR. They will never get better because they're broken.
Right.
I will call BS as a compound heterozygous MTHFR and one of the worst HLA-DRs you could have who's doing very well. I think your internalization of being broken is affecting your gene expression more than the genes themselves. So I think similar to what you said about the Aura Ring earlier, if we're gonna go into this realm, make sure that we're going into it with the mindset of optimization and not then taking on the label of being broken.
Right. No, I fully agree. In take forms, a lot of people will say, oh, I have the MTHFR or oh, I suffer from, and you could already see that labeling. And I feel like social media goes through these like ups and downs of the thing that's popular. And lately, in the last few months, there's been a trend again about MTHFR. I don't know exactly the context,
It
but
has a great marketing department. I think
okay.
in the grand scheme, it's so much less important than we
Yes.
all talk
No,
about.
totally, totally.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you. The next one you talk about is dental, and I have seen that where people that are suffering from parasites or some toxins, they're hiding in the places that you've done oral surgery and now you don't feel anything. So,
Yeah.
but it's a very, very expensive field, especially the
Yeah.
holistic dentistry. But if you can share why that's even important.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the common things that we think about, like amalgams, root canals, I think many people can understand that having a dead body part in the body is probably not ideal. We know there's so many infections that live in root canals, but I think kind of what you were getting at with cavitations, where maybe we had wisdom teeth previously extracted, maybe they didn't heal well, and we end up then kind of having a whole soup of microbes that are growing there. I went through cavitation surgery about 12 years ago. And I don't even think, I mean, I talked to Dr. Stuart Nunley about this at one point, and he was saying it's not just the chronic Lyme, chronic illness people that like these kinds of cavitations are also common in the general public, but their bodies can probably still manage it, right? They haven't, their bodies haven't flipped the circuit breaker to say, yo, I'm just overloaded here and I need to take you offline so that you can do some work. But I do think cavitations can be an area that can be helpful. I don't think for most people it's immediate magic. It takes time after we've removed that stress from the system. I think Dr. Klinghardt would suggest that we want to make sure the endogenous retroviruses have been largely silenced to support these kinds of procedures, the outcomes, and the long-term healing. To your point, Dr. Simon, you generally speaking is going to address parasites systemically before getting into a lot of the dental work. But you think about things like SIBO, how much of SIBO is what we are swallowing many times a day or what's coming from our sinuses or our oral cavity? And we know now that things like Alzheimer's disease that we see HSV1 and P. gingivalis and Treponema denticola. And so there's a lot to be said about the importance of focusing on the oral microbiome as well to support systemic health. There's, oral probiotic products now and toothpaste and other things. But surprisingly, one of the things that I don't know that people think a lot about is many mouthwashes are probably going to do exactly the wrong thing. We don't want to be completely nuking the microbiome. And so people that are using, I'm not going to name any brands, but we can all think about what those are. People that are using those things on a regular basis are probably not supporting their health by doing that.
Right.
And then this is an area that I intentionally put towards the very end because I think it needs to be a conversation between the patient, the dentist or surgeon, and the captain of your ship, whoever that practitioner is. Timing is important. Sometimes, if you're doing a surgical procedure, maybe you need more antimicrobials or more support to make sure that all goes well. So, we want to make sure that your whole team is really working well together and having conversation about it. But the dental piece, unfortunately, it's kind of like the moldy house. It's like the area that no one really wants to go. I mean, I don't like going to the dentist either. And at the same time, it does affect us systemically and really does need to be looked into.
Yeah, and the one thing I want to bring up is making sure that people don't just go to their dentist and remove all their amalgam saying, "Oh, I have mercury fillings, and so therefore I just need to get them out." It is a careful process that when you release it, yes, when you're eating hot foods, you're eating cold foods, you're releasing microdoses of the mercury while it's in your system, but you could do so much more damage that when you pull it out and not do it in a very careful way, you can release a lot more mercury into your system, which is never ideal. So I think I looked at Andy Cutler's work a long time ago, but he even says your body needs to be ready before you start releasing all of these areas for mercury. And then once you're ready, then you could figure out how to deal with the heavy metal. So I think people
I mean, I
should
think
just,
we've both talked with clients that have been sick for years that the origin or initiation of their complex chronic illness was improperly removed amalgams, right? There are those people out there that
yeah,
they were fine until it was done incorrectly. So I agree, biological dentist,
yes,
there's a smart protocol, there's appropriate organizations. I would not have and sadly I did this, but it was many, many years ago before I knew, like this was probably 25 plus years ago, but I would never have mercury amalgams removed by a dentist who could not convince me well that they understood the proper safe way to do it. Totally agree with you.
right, right. Your final step, step 15.
Second to final, but yeah, we're almost there. So
Okay.
step 15 is optimizing structure. This is also newer in this version of the process. And so these are looking at all the physical things that we can do to support the body. And I, over the past few years, have benefited quite a bit from having more of a focus in this realm personally. And so things like tongue tie can be a big issue. I, as an adult, had a tongue tie release procedure in April of this year, and it was a process. Would I say everyone should do it? No, probably not. It was a huge commitment. Do I have better mobility in my neck? Absolutely. Do I have better mobility in my low back? Absolutely. Do I have less pain? Absolutely. Great. But, it was a lot of work. But I think there are many people that do have restrictions related to the tongue that influences the body. The bite, Dr. Klinghardt will talk about dental occlusion. If the bite is off, then the nervous system is constantly kind of triggered by that issue with the bite. Dr. Nathan really likes more biodynamic cranial osteopathy, so kind of the James Jellis school of thought. Working with a good osteopath can be amazing. I also, just in the past many months, found a wonderful visceral manipulation person that can really work with kind of optimizing organ function and fascial restrictions and the digestive system and so on. So myofascial release can be helpful. I do personally have a chiropractic appointment once a month. But in this population, I would also urge caution, particularly if we're talking about some of the collagen related disorders, if we're talking about EDS or CCI or some of those things, like, abrupt aggressive things can be harmful. So other tools like maybe slow flow yoga or Pilates or breathing techniques. There's a lot that I think we don't always think about that we can do with good body work and supporting the body. And that also, in many cases, also making the body and the nervous system feel safer about the healing process. And maybe the last comment on structure is, and I'm sure you see this as well, but Ehlers-Danlos syndrome was another thing that probably, I don't know, 8 years or so ago, like you almost never heard of it. And now so many people are dealing with hypermobility syndromes, EDS, even CCI or craniocervical instability. And it's a very interesting area that I think we're still learning a lot about. I think many things like mold exposure, like glyphosate, like Bartonella, all contribute to it. But this is a whole nother subpopulation of the complex chronic illness community community that really seems to have grown a lot in the last several years. So the last one is step 16. That's regeneration, restoration. That's where we're thinking. I like the analogy David Jernigan used, which is, okay, great, we've gotten rid of the termites, but you still have some damage to your structure, some wood rot essentially that we need to fix. So maybe in this realm, optimizing hormones. I will say many people need to do some hormone optimization earlier, but that gets back into the whole cell danger response conversation. Right. Is the body intelligently downregulating your thyroid or your testosterone because of some other threat? I really like membrane medicine here. So phosphatidylcholine, the Patricia Cain protocol, the plasmalogens that we talked about, getting the healthy fats in, as some like Dr. Jill Krista will say, kind of doing an oil change. Peptides, wonderful here for regeneration, like BPC 157. I've been exploring and think there's a place for the peptide bioregulators, like the Nature's Marvels or the Cavinson realm bioregulators. I love red light therapy and incorporate that very regularly for supporting the mitochondria, but also the collagen and just giving us more vital force. And then, always interested in watching, like when we talk about regeneration and restoration, is there a place to talk about stem cells and exosomes? Yes. Am I super excited about it? Not really. Do I think that it can be amazing for a localized issue? Absolutely. Do I commonly see people doing things in that realm that have a major systemic effect when we're in a complex chronic illness, cell danger response type scenario? Not really. But this last step is about how do we then regenerate, restore, repair, and optimize.
I think that was such a great way to share the holistic health, chronic illness, and we use a lot of the modalities you brought up, and that's why it's so complex, so nuanced to share things on social media or podcast. So I appreciate all the tactical tools you brought up, and if people need additional support, there are areas that they can look into, and this really organizes it, but it also makes it super overwhelming, right? Of well, where do I start? If I have Lyme and mold, do I go after mold first? Do I go after Lyme?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts with maybe I don't have a ton of money? What you shared is somewhat overwhelming. Do you then just recommend going through the steps? I mean, what are your thoughts for the person listening to this right now?
Yeah. So I think the vast majority of the steps, there's things we can do that are expensive and things we can do that are not as expensive. So I think we can look at it from that lens. Like, what are some of the things we can do to support detox that are going to be less expensive than others? I think to your question about someone dealing with mold and Lyme, I am of the opinion that we generally want to address the mold issue first, in large part because that is the environment around us. If you think of us as the goldfish and our environment as the fish tank, like, are we really going to get healthy when we're living in a dirty fish tank? No,
Right.
I don't think so. So, I say that, but at the same time, if your mold recovery journey is a 18, 24-month process and you have to fix your house and you have to do all these other things, does that mean that you can't start supporting your body and dealing with Lyme until you're done with mold? No. I mean, there is, certainly a lot of overlap in these steps. And could it be that somebody has a very clear Bartonella presentation? Let's say they have striae, or what looks like stretch marks on the body, and they have rage and they have huge anxiety and things like that. Like, maybe would you then say, well, you know what, let's do some support for the Bartonella while we're also then starting to plan and execute how we're going to address the mold. I mean, I think there certainly are those individualized kinds of scenarios, but as a general rule, I think most people that work with mold and Lyme, with some exceptions, would say that we want to address the mold piece first, have the external environment support the healing process. And I would agree with that. But nothing, I mean, you've worked in this realm long enough to know that very little in health and healing is black and white. And more often than not, it's various shades of gray.
Obviously, the step one for you is the limbic. Would, if someone were to leave this conversation, is that what you recommend them first do? Should they start doing some of the limbic system work and pursue that to then start maybe down regulating even the mast cell response, and then they can pursue everything else?
Generally speaking, I would say yes, that the
Okay.
order that I talked through them with you is, somewhat intentional. Again, is everyone going to fit that exact same order? No. Are there going to be some people that are really chill type B people that just came in from surfing that have, Lyme and mold and all those things and just kind of feel like, you know what, my vagus nerve is great and my limbic system is great? Yeah. Have I seen very many of those people with complex chronic illness? No, I
Agreed.
really haven't, right? I mean, how many type B people? In fact, I used to joke I never saw anybody come in, a type B chill dude come in from the beach that just, caught a wave and got bit by a tick on the beach and, their life kind of fell apart. And then it actually did happen. And then I went, okay, well, that story is kind of no longer. But it's so rare. And I would say if we're thinking about it, it also depends on the degree of the severity of their condition. And I think the more complex, the more chronic the condition, the more that limbic vagal nervous system piece comes into play. I've even heard people like Jill Carnahan, who many people will know, say that like 100% of her mold patients need to be doing something in the limbic space. So yeah, I would say for most people, now if they're not super chronically ill and they're not dealing with mold and Lyme and they have other things going on, then it may be very different. Maybe all of the steps won't apply, but I
Yeah.
do think for many that is the foundation, that trifecta that Dr. Nathan really talks about with limbic, vagal, and the mast cell component.
Do you think for the chronically ill, I mean, to go through all of these steps, it's a lot. And of course, we should always fight for healing, and I believe that. But is there a point ever that we can just quote unquote live a normal life where we don't have to worry about the building as much or worry about getting a tick bite or worry about the food we're eating? Maybe on a trip we can just eat what we want and enjoy the things, or will we forever have to worry about the EMFs and what's the
Yeah.
stuff that we're exposed to?
It's a challenging question. So
I
I
know.
think that children, because of their vitality and vital force, I've seen many children with complex health challenges, Lyme, mold, pandas, whatever, that have been able to largely move past
Okay.
it and get to a place where maybe they're not going to, as an adult, think about it a lot. Now, would I suggest that they're going to continue to do well if they are every day living in a moldy house or a moldy workplace? Probably not. Might they still have enough vital force and ability to regulate that they wouldn't be unwell again? Possibly. I think as an adult, I've been at this healing process now for more than 25 years. Do I still take supplements? Yes. Do I still do red light therapy? Yes. Do I still do coffee enemas? Yes. Do I still do all of these things? Do I still make sure my home is there is no mold-free environment. Do I still make sure that it's as mold poor as I can possibly make it? Absolutely. Do I think that if I were every day getting exposed to significant mold and mycotoxins and more vector-borne infections, that I would have to maybe revisit and focus more on some areas? Yes. But I think when we get to a certain point of healing, it depends a lot on some of the things that you brought up. Do we have supportive relationships and community? Have we learned through the journey how to manage our stress response and bring tools in to help, whether that's meditation or other things to kind of help manage that stress response? Are we still getting good nutrition? Are we, as much as possible, able to minimize a lot of the exposures to stressful things in the world, like significant toxicant exposures and things of that nature? And so I think there are those people that do fully move past these conditions. It may also depend on like what the duration was. Like for me, it was almost 10 years before I even finally had a clue of like, oh, it's Lyme disease and oh, it's mold illness. And so, a lot of things probably had already been impacted. But I do think there are those people that fully move past it. Do I consider myself to have Lyme disease? No. Do I consider myself to have mold illness? No. Do I still treat myself with the priority, love, and respect that I think the illness was trying to teach me in the first place every day? Absolutely.
Well, I can bring in two things. One, a lot of the IEPs, so the indoor environmentalists, they do not have a chronic illness. And after decades of being exposed to mold, they get sick.
They
So
do.
it does not matter if you are healthy or robust, if you
Yeah.
keep getting exposed to these toxins that their goal in life is to remove the old and make ready for new. So if you know that and they colonize your body, what is it going to do? Its job is to, again, bring things to dust and then allow for new.
I mean, your point there is exactly right, and this is no secret, so I don't think either of them will care that I bring this up.
Okay.
But experts in this realm, like Mike Schranz, who is one of
Okay.
my heroes in the IEP realm, like John Banta, who is
Okay.
also tremendous. I mean, they've talked about how their own health was impacted by their choice of
Yes.
profession when prior to that they were actually very good, and so then they have to think about a lot of the things that we're talking about here to optimize their own health. So I agree with you.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll share is we do have a client that had MS, Hashimoto's. She decided to move to a place that the home is built in concrete, so very limited amounts of the home to have water damage and the toxic soup of biotoxins. And she was on a strict carnivore elimination diet, did gut healing, did I think she even did a fecal transplant and did all the things and has, you would say, fully healed from all illnesses. And she can live her life. She can eat even tortilla chips. Granted, it's not in America, so it's probably cleaner. But when she comes back to the States and gets exposed to mold, she slowly starts seeing the degradation. So
Yeah,
you can fully heal. I believe it. And I think I'm on the
I
same
agree.
page with you that if you've been chronically ill for a longer time, it's just think of it as a foundation. And if your body's been attacked for so many years, the impact is greater. And so it may just take time.
Yeah,
And if you are jumping around with doctors and practitioners and protocols, it's like, how much are you really even getting at the foundation to improve it? And so these
yeah.
are things that we should think about. But I do believe people can heal. It
I
just
mean, even
takes.
even though I can eat anything and don't think it is causing me any problems, doesn't mean that I do, right?
Right, right. Of
Like
course, of course.
I recognize like can I eat gluten? Yeah, absolutely. Am I going to notice anything from it? Probably not, but I know enough now to know that it's not good for me, and so I
Right.
just choose not to do that, right?
Right, exactly. Just like cigarettes are legal, but do you choose to smoke every day or drink every day? Hopefully not. So I totally get it.
Yeah. So
Thank you.
I do want to make
Yeah,
sure that just since we had this part of the conversation, I do want to make sure that we leave people with hope because
of
I think
course.
now we're
Yes.
talking about the challenges of can people fully get past it. I mean, I went from spending 16 hours a day in bed and fumbling through. I would still try to go to work. I couldn't even wear shoes because I had such pain. I would go in flip-flops to a corporate job. I mean, it was just kind of crazy. And now do I hike? I just went for a beautiful hike in the mountains yesterday. Do I paddle board? Do I, preparing to do a big Manitou incline here in a couple of months? And so, there's nothing that I can't do. I still do take care of myself,
Mhm.
but I feel very, very healthy. And sadly, when you look around in the world at those people who never identified as having a chronic illness, you kind of start to see like, you know, even people that think they're healthy, yeah, maybe not so much. So
Right.
I'm super blessed and grateful, and I think that people really can move past these conditions. Does it mean that we still don't take good care of ourselves? I mean, for me, no, I still do take good care of myself. But do I think of myself as like a sick person like I was for so many years? Absolutely not.
Okay, thank you. Yes, and it is true. Since I work with the chronically ill, am I seeing a paradigm that's not the reality of the rest of the world? And someone said, Judy, just go into a restaurant and do a surveillance of all the people there, and you'll start to see that most people are chronically ill. And I was working with somebody in our community, and the data they found is that 88% of people in America have some type of chronic illness. So it's actually more common than we think. So thank you so much for your time. Your paradigm really helps, bucket everything together to make sense and see the steps that people have to go through. And more than anything, I really think it shares that sometimes it just takes time and using different levers and finding the right person that you connect with to work with, and that there's so many facets to healing. And it's not that you're doing it wrong. It's just you might not be at the right step or the right tool for your thing going on today. And so
Yep.
I thank you and I appreciate all that you shared because it's so important.
Yeah, and if people have questions, they can certainly reach out through my website. I'm happy to dialogue with people. If they want to see the slides that we just kind of talk through, they can find that on my website as well at betterhealthguy.com/steps. That's there. They can download it and really dive deeper. And I always love hearing from people too. If there's something that someone feels like I missed or another tool that I didn't talk about, like that's how I learn as well. So feel free to reach out. And Judy, just want to thank you for the invitation, but also for your incredible work. I mean, I've read your website and listened to your podcast, and you're doing great things in the world as well. And so I appreciate that, knowing you are out there fighting the good fight as well.
Well, I think if you have your own chronic illness journey, it becomes personal. And that in that personal, you fight for better so that you don't have to go through 20 years of finding answers. And if somebody had given you what you know today, how much quicker would you have healed, right? So I think that's why we do the work we do. So thank you. Where else can people find you? If people wanted to work with you, is it on your website as well?
Yeah, so if they just want to go to my website, betterhealthguy.com, and they can reach out. I do some coaching. It's a little limited just depending on how much my bandwidth is at any given time, but I'm happy to talk about coaching sessions. I'm happy to respond to people by email. My podcast is another source where I try to deep dive with some of the real experts in the field. And so that's available pretty much anywhere you can find podcasts. It's just called Better Health Guy Blogcasts. And I'm also, as I mentioned, on the board of the Limelight Foundation. So if there's people listening that want to support that work or could potentially benefit from financial support so their own healing journey can really be better supported, they can learn more about that at limelightfoundation.org.
Well, thank you so much again for your time. I'll put all of your information in the show notes and all the steps, especially that graphic. I'll put all of that in the notes so that people can follow along. There's so much information out there, and it's just being able to understand that sometimes it's a process and then also finding the right person to work with and partner with because I think it's so important. So thank you. Thank you again
Thank,
so much.
thank you, Judy. Thanks so much.
When I started my carnivore elimination diet practice, we focused just on nutrition and then with a hyper focus on gut healing. And as we saw a subset that wasn't healing enough, I ended up falling into all of the areas that Scott brings forth. I probably have to do a little bit more research in the vascular area, but we have a team member that suffers from a lot of vascular stuff. And we also had a client that suffered from EDS. So we learned a lot about that, but it's definitely an area I will look into more. So thank you, Scott, for that. But the areas he brings up are different levers that we have also found in our client and our private practice that people need a little bit of adjustments and healing. The beauty of a carnivore diet or a elimination diet where you're eliminating a lot of the toxicants from the foods, the additives, the food coloring, the pesticides from the sprays that we use on the plants, even if it's organic. I think the beauty of a carnivore diet is we are cleaning up the diet as best as possible, giving the nutrients and raw materials that are the most bioavailable. And then it may knock out so many of the steps that Scott had so greatly shared. Sometimes it's not enough. And so if you are suffering from mold illness or Lyme infections and other areas that you have been ill for quite a bit of time, especially a few decades, it usually takes more than the diet. Now, if diet alone will heal you enough, that is amazing and wonderful. But sometimes people regress after they've done carnivore for a bit of time. They've noticed, well, now it doesn't work enough as it used to. And I suspect it's because your bucket is still full and now the diet is not masking it enough. The diet is always on the table. We always want to eat bioavailable foods and nutrients that support the body as best as it can so that your immune function can be its strongest. The mitochondrial can produce as much energy as possible and burn the fuel that we're meant to, which is fatty acids and ketones. But beyond that, a lot of times there is a imbalance with our limbic system, or if we're having a mast cell response, why is it that our immune system is overly reactive? These are areas, and not everyone has to do everything, as Scott had mentioned, but for many of us, especially in the chronic illness space, there are facets of each step that you will have to consider. And it is not that you have to do all of it at once. And this is where, again, you find the practitioner that makes sense for you, that you can work with and trust and allows you to feel safe with your limbic system and that you can progress in healing. There is no practitioner that has every single answer. And even if they have the every single answer, it's also some amount of relationships and connection and the chemistry between the two people that make it work. So you have to find what makes sense for you. And I know I wish Scott and I could just give you, for step one, all you need is this. And step two, you just need this. But it is more complex, and we would be disingenuous to say this is the magic key. So I hope that this conversation allows you to consider areas and facets of your healing that maybe you have never addressed. And those are the areas that you may want to pursue in hopes of getting closer to root cause healing. We all can heal. You heard Scott say that he used to be in bed for the bulk of his day, and now he gets to hike and do all of these wonderful things that he couldn't do maybe a decade ago. We can have healing. It just might take a little bit more time than we'd ideally like. It might take more time than just popping a pill or using a specific lever, but healing is possible. I also think that nutrition should be the fundamental baseline because what you feed your body is what makes up your full body, and even down to the cell, all the way down to the mitochondria. So diet should always be on the table. And then from there, you can explore everything else. The limbic system, the mind body, is so important. And we have seen it also in our practice. It has been life changing for so many individuals. I hope that this gives you food for thought, things to think about, levers to pull. But I hope more than anything, it gives you the oomph to know that you probably haven't checked out everything and that there is still hope in your healing journey. Keep fighting and keep going. Okay, guys, make sure to eat a lot of meat. Take care of your bodies because it is the only place you have to live. I will talk to you later. Bye, guys.